Miss Wu,
Here.
We're done.
Mr. Evans, Miss Colasetti,
Here.
Miss Bishop,
Here.
Miss Wilkin,
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here. And I will note that this is for Monday, February 14th, 2022. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes from the previous meeting of January 24th, 2022. Is there a motion for approval?
I'll move approval of the minutes from January 24th, 2022. Second.
Moved by Jaya, seconded by Grace. Are there any substantial corrections? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Miss Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Miss Colasetti,
Yes.
Miss Bishop,
Yes.
Miss Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. We have no additions to the agenda. I will note that we're working from the amended agenda that was posted online. If you're working from your paper packet, I want to note that item JB under new business, item J2 under new business has been removed. That issue is no longer alive. That was killed by the county. So that was removed from the council agenda entirely.
I have a question about the agenda. Also, I want to take something off the consent agenda, but I do that during the report of standing committee. Is that right?
Yes, you can ask to have an item removed from the consent agenda if you want to have it discussed further.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to public input. If you'd like to address the Urbana City Council, please raise your hand. Brandy McCoy. You'll have 4 minutes to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. So I'm here this evening to talk about a couple things. First on my list here is the fact that UPD has consistently refused to cooperate with the CPRB in a few ways, as we've heard in past meetings. But I wanted to make sure that the council is aware that UPD changed their policy, which required all taser displays and discharges to be reviewed by CPRB. The policy on their website currently shows that only discharges will be reviewed. Maybe I missed UPD coming back to council to make such a change, as for my understanding is required for use of force policy changes per city ordinance. I hope that's the case, but somehow I don't think that's it. The alternative is a police department unbeholden to oversight and accountability. So my question at this point is, what's going to be done about it? Serafin recently announced his upcoming retirement. So instead, I think he should be fired and should not be eligible for any sort of pension in relation to his position as police chief. This unlawful change in policy should not go unpunished. We are to achieve and maintain the level of oversight and accountability that the city of Urbana has promised its constituents. On another note, I have a question about the youth services funding that you guys are going to discuss later.
Randy, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Champaign County Housing Authority's Youth Build Program could provide job training and alternative school intervention to young people. I'd like to hear more, like a more specific statement for why this particular program isn't being recommended for any funding, like what the grading system looked like. I know that there was mention of like a whole system. So, is it that it's not a very active program in Urbana? And if that's the case, would funding from Urbana promote more activity from the program in our city? I just don't see why we would forego the opportunity to fund any workforce training and certificate programs that aimed at our youths. I know that we have limited funding and that all of these programs are likely to benefit young people in our community in a number of ways. But according to the U.S. Census, the most recent one, nearly 30% of our population in Urbana lives in poverty, and our per capita income is less than $25,000. So we need more people working for a living wage in Urbana. An expansion of workforce training is vital to meeting that need. If not this and not SWIFT, what is the city doing to expand workforce training specifically? So, and the last thing, I know I always come here complaining, and I know that that's probably tiresome. So one positive thing I want to note is that I want to applaud the 90% of the capital improvement plan being either on schedule or at least not critically behind schedule. So that's like effective, right? That's pretty cool. And I'm also looking forward to the discussion that's scheduled for today's meeting this evening. So thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Next up is Alan Max Axelrod.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, Alan Max Axelrod, resident of Urbana. I'm speaking to you tonight in my capacity as the campaign lead of No Ameren Shutoffs, a coalition of 53.5 member organizations and counting. There's one in the process of joining. Their vote already passed. They just have to designate a liaison. So last week, we disrupted Governor Pritzker's press conference in a grocery store in Springfield. And during that disruption, he again lied about policy. And the chants were actually pointing out that utility shutoffs for non-payment during the winter moratorium happened. Fun fact, he invested in one of those corporations that shut off people's power. So that sucks. We did not disrupt his press conference in Champaign. Instead, I walked right up to the head of security and gave him a copy of the Champaign County Board resolution saying that we were polite today and to ask him to deliver that to the governor. I did ask some other public officials who, for varying reasons, were not able to do so. That said, we also talked with some other people about the context for that struggle, including congressional candidates, 5 of whom have now signed our pledge to sponsor the Maintaining Access to Essential Services Act of 2021 should they win their election. 3 of whom are in Illinois, 2 of whom are in Washington, and to be honest, we haven't really reached out to that many folks just yet. And it is very probable that there will be more signatures in Central Illinois' congressional candidates for that very pledge. The context for this is that the Illinois student government, which has a decent portion of the population in Urbana, that is usually talked about when people want to deflect from poverty statistics. No, the students do not make up the overwhelming amount of poverty in this community. We already pointed out childhood poverty statistics contradicting that. But they were the first body to pass a resolution with the demand that Congress pass the Maintaining Access to Essential Services Act of 2021, followed by the McLean County Democratic Party and followed by the Champaign County Board.
City council meeting, listening to them.
Phyllis, you are not muted. It's totally okay. Tech issues suck. So the main reason for pointing out all this context is that the city of Urbana was the first city council to pass any resolution on utility shutoffs that helped to spur the 12 resolutions that we've since passed calling on the governor to follow basic pandemic safety policy. And through the efforts of admittedly some of the previous folks on City Council, but with support from current City Council members. Special thank you to Grace. We have managed to pass these resolutions and to get 5 congressional candidates, many of whom are expected to win their races, signed on to that petition or to pledge to sponsor the Maintaining Access to Essential Services Act of 2021. Correspondence with Rodney Davis's office. Interestingly enough, he pointed out that it is in the Finance Committee, despite the fact that it has 2021 in its name. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to address the Urbana City Council? Please raise your hand. All right. I'm not seeing any hands raised. We'll move on to the next item of business, which is a presentation and an introduction to the fire station designers, and this would be FGM Architects and I believe Public Works. And is Chief Loss here tonight?
I don't know if the chief is with us tonight.
Yes, could Barima, could you admit Chief Loss to the meeting? Great.
There he is.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Just wanted to share a little background with everyone on the process so far through this. We issued a request for qualifications last September, received 10 submittals in October, and between October, November, and December, we reduced the list from the 10 applicants down to the 3 most qualified project teams for this, and conducted individual interviews with those project teams. I believe that was in late November, early December. And then coming out of that, the selection committee worked together to then reduce the list down to 1 selected candidate to work with, who was FGM Architects. Some of the things that tipped the scale in FGMA's favor were their project management approach, especially as the project transitions to construction administration. FGMA also demonstrated a greater ability to conduct cost estimating at a rapid, frequent, and cost-effective scale during the early planning phases, since the scope is somewhat loose still on these. FGMA also appeared to have more fire station experience that was comparable in size, cost, and geography to Urbana stations. And there was a general appreciation for FGMA's approach with the well building standard. The well building standard is a performance-based system for measuring, certifying, and monitoring features of the built environment that impact human health and well-being through air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, and mind. A little update on where we're at right now. We've received a contract proposal from FGMA at the beginning of February. We are conducting internal professional and legal reviews on that, and we're hoping to complete those reviews here in the next couple of weeks and iron out final details with them by the end of the month. At this time, no services are expected to really begin until probably March once we get the final contract signed. But without further ado, I wanted to invite Jason Estes, who's a principal for FGMA Architects and who will be the project manager on Urbana Fire Stations improvements, to introduce himself and give you some additional background on their firm.
Tim, thank you so much. And apparently I need to bring you with me whenever I'm going to meetings, because you made me sound really good. So that's awesome. The FGMA, we have been in the business since 1945. We have offices as a national-wide firm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Oak Brook, and Chicago, Illinois, O'Fallon, Illinois, St. Louis, Missouri, Austin, Texas, and Reston, Virginia. We are a national expert within public safety specific with police and fire. We actually present on a national level to the fire community. And as Tim stated, we push the boundaries beyond just architecture. We make sure that we look at the building and the occupants to make sure that we're providing a well environment, since this is something that is a third of their life. We definitely look at the mental aspect of the jobs that we're looking at. We've partnered with actually a brain doctor as we've gone through on specifics on how we can de-stress the situation within the built environment. We are very excited about these projects. When we interviewed, we actually stated that with replacing 2 stations, it is a huge chance and opportunity within the department and within the city to really make a stance on how you want to be able to look at change. Not that you need change, but it makes such a big impact to be able to kind of set the ground rules on how to do things forward. And not everybody is able to look at this opportunity from this large of an aspect. So it's a very exciting project from our standpoint. We do participate in a lot of fire service projects and organizations, everything from state level organizations to local county organizations. We've actually done work at Springfield for the Firefighter Memorial. We've done work right on campus there with the training facility at IFC on UIUC. So we tend to, we really take this more than just architecture, and we believe that it is a calling, and we want to be able to make sure that we give back to public safety. As Tim said, we're really looking forward to kind of getting that first step, and it's going to be an exciting time. And from the first few meetings that we've had, I believe this is going to be a great process.
Chief Loss, did you want to add any comments, and then we'll entertain questions from the council?
Sure. Thank you so much, Council Mayor, for the support in this. This has been a long time coming, over 50 years for these 2 stations. And I think everybody on council has seen the two old stations that we're going to be replacing, and the need that we have to move forward. This is truly monumental moving forward with these 2 new stations. One of the things that we really liked about FGMA was the fact that they were very progressive in the wellness program for our firefighters. I personally have 3 firefighters that have lost their battle with cancer due to things that were job related. So when FGMA came in, and one of their focal points was wellness of the station itself, that was very big for me as well. There's a lot of things that we're going to be able to do in these 2 new stations that will probably put Urbana on the map as far as changes that we want to see moving forward. These are 50 years plus stations. They're not going to be stations that we look at in 10, 15, 20 years of having to replace again. These are 50-year stations that we're looking at. So it's an investment. We know it's an investment. The commitment that you've made to help with that infrastructure is greatly appreciated beyond words. So thank you so much. We look forward to working with FGMA and making sure that these 2 stations, these 2 firehouses are going to be long lasting for the city of Urbana. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chief. Any questions? Chris?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Jason, you're probably going to say yes, but just so for the folks at home, has your firm has experience designing decontamination and transition areas for firefighters to get cleaned up?
Yes, actually we have. We've actually done some proactive elements that are cutting edge. Some of them have been early enough that in time and as reporting has come in, it has changed even from there. We've done things as simple as full wash off areas in gross decon. We've done offsite. Obviously, they're used to doing offsite decon, gross decon, but even internally, looking at things such as saunas or heavy showers, boot washes, things that can take contaminants not only off the surface but out of pores, out of things as quickly as possible, so that it's not absorbed into the body, creating a wide open zone that no matter what the new technology, as the chief stated, if this is a 50, 75-year building, whatever the new technology is, as the technologies improve and progress, something to make sure that we're not bringing those contaminants into the living quarters and keeping them isolated. The carcinogens are the major piece, and that's what the chief was talking about. So absolutely, we have experience, and we will press the questions and make sure that we challenge the status quo.
Thank you.
Grace.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering when or if there will be the chance for input from council and the public in these design plans.
Yeah, just to reference, the setup here is going to be kind of a phased approach. So once we get the initial phase set up, the idea is that FGMA is going to work with us to kind of flush out some of our conceptual ideas as to what all we want incorporated, costs associated with those things, to really define a more fine-tuned scope. And I think as we work through that process, we'll be coming back to council with kind of recommendations that come out of the conceptual design and feasibility analysis stuff.
Thank you.
James?
Yeah, I was wondering, Jason, if you could describe any projects that you've done that incorporated other community resources in the fire stations that you've worked on, like community rooms or resource offices.
So there's a lot of projects when we're talking about fire stations. So fire stations tend to be a community-based organization, mainly because you need them within a certain distance as you're looking at response, unlike a police station or something where you may have one for the entire community and they're centrally located. Fire stations are smaller and they're typically done within the neighboring communities. So it is a place where when you have a training room or something of sorts that allow them to be able to do training and meet, those rooms tend to pull a lot of double duty. So a lot of times they may serve as a community meeting room. They may serve as a homeowners association meeting, or Boy Scout meeting, a Girl Scout meeting, other type of meetings in there. But it's gone more than that too. We have seen a lot of times with in the public zone of the fire station, because we are looking at secure pieces, but inside that public zone, we've given offices to be able to utilize for different community groups. Within one community, we actually had an outreach program that was meant more for like a civilian corps of the police, to be able to allow kind of people to have a safe place to go to. We've done stuff such as community medicines, so intermodal medicine. So basically, they're able to, rather than going to a doctor or the ambulance constantly going to the same place, we've looked at certain places that can have staff that can go to the client with the vans and medical and be able to serve out of a fire station. I think the most extreme example that we did at one place was actually a conversion of a facility that was turned into a station, and in the back it was an old school, so it had a dance room or like a gym, and they turned it into a giant community room that they hold father-daughter dances in on a regular basis in an older community, and it's been taken on greatly as a sense of pride within the community. So to the imagination, I think there are a lot of opportunities We would be interested in the communities that we go to see if there are needs or things that we can do to really build that community trust and strength. It is definitely an asset to the city.
Mary Alice.
I'm wondering if you might be able to email and you can coordinate with somebody on staff like Tim, just the locations, the towns, and maybe some example projects so we can get some ideas on types of items that might be feasible. You could send us like the towns and the type of project it was so we can look online and get some ideas.
Absolutely.
I can also share the original submittals from Jason that kind of highlight a lot of their experience with some of these things and highlight some of the different aspects of the different projects.
Chris?
Yeah, this question might be too early to answer this question, but Tim or Jason, my question is, how, I don't know, are there going to be any opportunities for local construction companies and local workers to get construction jobs out of these projects?
Absolutely. Once the designs are complete, it'll be publicly bid like all of our other public infrastructure projects, giving an opportunity for general contractors in the location and area to either work as a general contractor or work as subcontractors on this project.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jason. Is there anything else you wanted to wrap up with?
The last question had to do with local contractors, and I know that one of our partners, our engineers, is actually within the Urbana-Champaign area, Clark Dietz, who is actually doing a lot of road work with the city on different projects and all that, but they're actually be working on our civil and our mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineering. But with their local presence and their history, we'll make sure that when it's time as well, that we're going to definitely reach out to all the contractors to make sure that everybody is aware, because we want to be able to give everybody that opportunity. So that is on our forefront. But other than that, I do appreciate it, and I do say again, this is an exciting time. I think the chief stated it. This will be a fun project, and we will be coming back to you hopefully with something that, getting your input and making sure that this is something that stands the test of time for the city.
Thank you. It's a wonderful opportunity for us. Thank you, Tim. Thank you,
Thanks,
Chief.
Jason.
Thanks, Jason. All right, we'll move on to the 2021 progress report. And this is our Public Works Director, Tim Cowan again.
I'm muted. That's fun. Okay, let me try that again. All right, can everybody see my screen now? It should just be kind of the progress report list up.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I put this together and I was trying to be as brief yet as detailed as I thought I could be to keep it concise, but really give you guys a good snapshot of where we're at on our 2021 capital improvement plan. Highlights, the green is kind of the effort has begun, or we're on schedule or ahead of schedule, or it's already completed. The yellows is we've either not begun or it's not quite to the phase that it needs to be at, but we're not critically behind at this point. And then red is it's either been deferred, eliminated, or behind schedule due to other needs. And we do have one new project that's on here that was approved in a previous budget amendment, which is part of the deferrals. So I'll just kind of walk through these, and then I'll take questions afterwards if anybody wants additional details on this stuff. Certainly hope, in the future to get a little bit more interactive with this to kind of help everybody's understanding and viewpoint geographically for everybody. So the pavement management system, we engaged AppTech in 2019 to scan all of our roadways, and this is more of like an ongoing services thing. We're yet to get a contract formalized with them. We're hoping to get that formalized here in the next couple of months and have them assist us in updating our pavement management condition indexes based on other capital improvements that have been done, and then also help us forecast scenarios for maintenance rehabilitation projects based on some of the condition indexes that they picked up previously. The miscellaneous traffic studies is more or less a placeholder for us. We don't have any immediate needs that have been identified that require a formal traffic analysis. This typically is going to be used for maybe like a preliminary intersection design study or intersection design studies where we have issues or we've had accidents or something like that warrants a necessary study that's above and beyond what we'll do with our own staff. The traffic signal planning and the street light planning and the stormwater management planning, these are all have been discussed at the various council strategic goal setting meetings. These are all online and in process. We are waiting to formalize contracts with various consultants to begin development of these asset management plans. The intent behind these is kind of evaluating everything we have, the conditions, the long-term planning and budgeting for preventative maintenance, repair, replacement, life cycle cost replacements, as well as functional modernization and upgrades with these things, such as signal modernization or streetlight LED conversions. We expect to have a contract executed with consultants to begin those in the next month, and likely to be completed probably by the end of the calendar year is our target right now for those. The stormwater management plan, this is one that was started before I got here, so it's about 1.5 years or 2 years in the making. We received a draft late last year, and we're just now really getting to reviewing the details of that. The intent is to have some internal meetings here this month, and then follow up with the consultant on that in March probably, with the ultimate goal of coming back to council with some more formal information with that consultant on the stormwater management plan that they had worked on, and get some additional feedback from council. The next two I'll talk about together: the storm sewer cleaning and televising, sanitary sewer cleaning and televising. Historically, we've contracted out the storm sewer cleaning and televising, but it's kind of fallen by the wayside the last couple of years with some of the turnover here in Public Works. The sanitary sewer cleaning and televising is something that we have typically staffed internally and done with our operations crews. In the CIP, we originally budgeted for funds to potentially do a little bit of both internal operations and external contract work on this stuff. And in our planning process, we decided that we thought that we could actually handle the entirety of the sanitary sewer cleaning with our in-house staff. So we eliminated that from being an outsourced contract cost at this time. And we're starting to work on bid documents to engage somebody to do the storm sewer cleaning and televising. And both of these, just high level view, the intent would be that we were targeting cleaning and inspecting all of our sewers on at least a 10-year cycle to identify major issues, spot repairs, rehabilitation opportunities before something fails catastrophically to the point that we have emergency repairs that are not just spot repairs, but longitudinal repairs of entire sewer runs. Those are, and sorry, I didn't touch on this, but those are more like management planning efforts. Those last two are kind of going to help us really help our outlay of our storm and sanitary asset reconstruction, rehabilitation in the 5-year CIP that it's somewhat been lacking in the last couple of years. Moving on, these are what I would consider more maintenance programs. So these are things that are probably happening pretty iteratively on an annual basis. Sidewalk maintenance, we are working on developing kind of a prioritization matrix similar to what we did with the roadway prioritization stuff. It's not a lack of need out there, I'm sure of that. So it's more kind of developing an internal process for how we get the information and the issues with sidewalks and then prioritize them so that we're addressing them efficiently. You know, some locations may need an interim fix where we go grind a vertical fault or we add a temporary bituminous asphalt patch while we plan to address it in a more permanent solution in the coming years. I think the intent here is that we are planning to develop a bid package to address the top priorities for construction heading into the next fiscal year. There have been some discussions about, depending on what comes out of the EQL, of partnering this with the EQL projects if there's enough need to put a bigger program together as we move forward with that. Bike lanes and side paths. This is generally for maintenance and repair of the bike lanes and side paths. We don't have any movement on this right now. Right now, we're considering doing any improvements and upgrades, spot repairs, things like that to the adjacent bike lanes and side paths with our capital projects that are listed further down this list. And just recently, and this will be coming to you in a budget amendment next week, but I think we're going to defer the $20,000 that was allocated for this to support a RAISE grant application that we're pursuing for the Florida Avenue project, which I'll touch on a little bit more later on as well. Traffic signal maintenance, we've got these funds are kind of here for contracted services as needed when our operations crew can't keep up. And just for reference, we have 48 signalized intersections that require operations and maintenance, and those are more or less, when we have issues, those are immediate responses. And as of recently, we've had some turnover and some unplanned turnover in our electrical division. So this more now than ever has been very handy for us to continually provide the expectations of the traffic signals being maintained regularly. The next one is the facilities general rehab line. So far this year, we're under contract to replace the obsolete HVAC controls at the city building, and we don't have any other identified needs specifically at this time, but the plan is to utilize the additional remaining funds in that line for contingency funds for some of the other the city projects, including the citywide storage facility that's ongoing here at the Public Works site. Annual street maintenance. So far this year, what we've done is we did some road patching for operational concerns along the Windsor Road stretch. We don't have other prioritized needs yet, but if and when we have identified enough that it's worthwhile to get somebody engaged on, we will try to do so. Typically for pavement patching that is critical, we are taking care of that in-house with our operations staff. This is more for larger scale projects that may include pavement patching multiple sections of roadway and blocks of roadway, and not just spot patching. The oil and chip seal preservation program has been completed. Generally, this took place in the northwest section of the city. And one approach we've taken since I've been here is trying to look at this as more of a preventative maintenance thing and try to cycle the city. So we're on essentially a 5-year cycle for our seal coating. Generally, it's recommended a 3 to 7 year cycle, depending on the use of the road and really the pre-existing condition of the road. Sometimes it will be sooner or later, but ideally what we're going to try to do with this is address some of those inconsistencies ahead of the seal coat so that the seal coat will last 5 years, and try to keep that on an iterative cycle for now. Joint and crack sealing is something I wanted to pursue when I got here, and we just have not had the bandwidth to really get this done yet. This would be a new program for the city. In the past, our operations crew have done some spot joint and crack sealing, generally targeting projects that we've reconstructed in the last 5 years. I think this is going to be a go for next year. Some of the funds of this, actually all the funds for this year have been deferred to the Washington Street Bridge reconstruction since being load rated. Pavement marking project. This is general preventative maintenance of our pavement striping. We have, depending on the areas, we have different needs for restriping. Some's 1 year, some's longer that this hits. And we spend about $30,000 a year getting contract restriping out there for things that our operations staff does not do. That has been completed. Storm sewer improvements and sanitary sewer improvements. This is mostly just repair work that's beyond what we're doing in operations. It requires confined space entry a lot of times. usually spot repairs on sanitary sewers, storm sewers, and the depths can be as much as 25 feet in some instances. And I know we had one storm sewer repair that more or less resulted in reconstruction of the majority of an intersection, and it was a very large undertaking. Thankful we have a miscellaneous construction services repairs contract with Deuce Construction currently that have been helping us out for the time being on that. And generally speaking, we appropriate about $250,000 a year towards, or $450,000 a year, 250 from storm and 200 from sanitary, of which I think right now we've spent about about 325,000 so far. So, and most of that has been storm sewer work this year. Bridge maintenance, the biannual contractual inspections for our bridges. We completed our last inspection in right after I got here in FY21, so we won't do that till FY23. We're working on developing an asset management plan for our bridges internally with our city engineer, John Zeman. And then I do think that we are going to end up spending this money or putting a little construction bid out to do some bank stabilization at the Perkins Road Bridge that some of the bank is starting to erode upstream of the structure. Boneyard Creek maintenance. This generally is for any miscellaneous needs along the Boneyard Creek. We haven't had anything major this year. Most of it has just been related to silt cleanup from floodwaters in the Boneyard area. And moving on now, this is the capital projects. These are kind of the really big standalone projects. The equity and quality of life project that we implemented this year. Applications are being accepted. I met with Carol last week, and I think we've got about 30 to 40 applications that she's kind of done a initial run through, and she's going to work with BPAC on scoring what we have right now to work on implementing this. So the plan is probably by the end of this fiscal year to get through what we've got and review those applications and try to build projects out of what's been submitted. The next few are all going to be kind of our facilities projects. So the citywide storage facility here at Public Works is under construction. They did site grading and clearing in December, and they're going to be prepared to jump back into construction come spring. I think they have all of their permits and everything are good to go at this point. I think the intent is for substantial completion to be done September 2022 on that facility. The city building interim reconfiguration. Some of the points for the initial purpose of the lobby reconfiguration were to improve the delineation of public and private space, improve the delineation of the police and then other business activities there at the city building, improve general security and wayfinding, and generally just improve the customer interactions there. Vince and Troy are kind of spearheading this one, and they met with the individual departments there at the city building to kind of talk about everybody's needs and wants to develop a scope. And at this time, I think we've got 50% drawings complete, and the intent is to get those to final completion and go out to bid this spring still with the construction contract for that to follow and probably be executed prior to the end of this fiscal year to get renovations underway starting probably in the beginning of next fiscal year. Fire stations 2 and 3, we kind of talked a little bit to Jason about this, but essentially we're looking to begin the design efforts probably in the next month. Conceptually, I think the idea would be is by the end of this fiscal year to get Jason's crew and the city staff engaged on developing alternatives for consideration for council and talk about final scoping of, everything that we want and then everything that, we intend to support financially as well. Public Works miscellaneous facilities, we had the interim arbor relocation, fleet services remodeling, arbor and LRC rehabilitation, and the Public Works rehab. The intent, I think, is to get architect engineer under contract by the end of the fiscal year to begin the design and planning process for those improvements. We do not have anybody engaged at this time. ADA life safety and then the citywide security improvements. The intent is to incorporate ADA life safety improvements at the city building reconfiguration project. And then the citywide security improvements are going to be dependent on what we select to implement at the city building. The intent will be that the security improvements will likely be implemented at all of our facilities. So that's to be determined out of the reconfiguration process. So again, these are not behind, but they just haven't begun yet, and they're not critically behind schedule. The AD life safety is pending the city building reconfiguration and the security improvements as well. The Fairlawn project got deferred to reconsideration in this year's CIP. Generally, this was going to then support the Washington Street Bridge reconstruction project after it was low graded this year. So it's been deferred and it will be reprioritized with the capital improvements in this year. Lincoln and Springfield project is underway. Construction started last fall. I think they've got most of the concrete flat work done along the west side of the road there. They'll pick back up here as weather breaks, finish the concrete flat work on the east side of the road, and then perform resurfacing once they get all that stuff done and utility adjustments. We are coordinating with Illinois American on this. They have some aged water main along Springfield that they would really like to replace. So we're coordinating with them so that they can get that replacement done ahead of our resurfacing, so we don't have a bunch of patches after it's done. So that's been a convenient find for us. The Ray Street resurfacing from Washington, California, we are all but ready to bid. We plan on putting that out to bid here probably in the next, I think in the next month for sure. Bids will be open probably mid to late March for that, and construction will commence shortly thereafter. Savannah Green, we've engaged a consultant to perform a pavement rehabilitation study to look at the alleys and Smith Road throughout Savannah Green. We've got a lot of failing pavement through there, and we want to look at some alternatives for reconstruction or possibly rehabilitating some of that, just so that it's a little bit more functional for the long-term use. Savannah Green was kind of an experimental development, not experimental, but it was a new style of development in the early 2000s that the city pursued. And there's some challenges with the alleyways there. They were constructed per our roadway standards, but I think just the general use of those alleys has made it hard for that pavement to really hold up its life. Windsor resurfacing from Race to the West Boundary. We have preliminary design drawings that we've reviewed and sent comments back to a consultant on, and I think the anticipation will be that will be out to bid. The design will be complete by the end of the fiscal year, potentially out to bid before the end of the fiscal year, and construction will likely commence in the fall. Philo Colorado Anderson is a similar time frame. It's probably lagging a little bit behind. This may be a fall bid with construction spanning fall and then next spring as well. And then the Carl Sanitary Sewer was a project. We've got a sanitary sewer that runs below Carl Hospital that we're working on. We're meeting with consultant this month to talk about creating a scope for performing a feasibility study initially to see what our alternatives are to potentially divert flow and get out of potential liability headache between us and Carl both. And we've been engaged with Carl on this already, and we'll continue to do so as we get a study started on that, and UCSD potentially, depending on the need for a lift station. And then the last one is the Washington Street Bridge reconstruction project. This came up. This was not part of our original plan CIP, but based on the bridge inspection that was completed in FY21 and a follow-up visit by IDOT, this structure has received a 12-ton load rating, which restricts MTD buses from traversing over this bridge, which they've been deferring their routes since we found out about this, and they're very interested in how fastly we can get this repaired, resolved. This bridge was actually looked at for replacement in the early 2000s by the city engineering staff. At the time, the driving force was some drainage concerns, which potentially have since been resolved. But what we've done is the initial phase, we've got a contract with a consultant to do a hydraulic analysis to verify if we still have drainage concerns in addition to the structural integrity concerns we have. The hydraulic analysis could potentially reduce the scope of the project if some of the drainage concerns from the early 2000s have been resolved. And that is it. Like I said, I hope this will be more interactive in the future and we can walk through this a little bit more interactively on a map. But for now, that's what we got. And I would entertain any questions, concerns, and I'm happy to provide additional information for anybody that wants it.
We'll go into council questions in a minute, but I just wanted to add, it's important for everyone to understand the intentionality behind this, what we're seeing here tonight, especially when it comes to the facilities projects and the equal projects. The planning for and the underlying studies and assessments that now support these facility projects started 4 to 5 years ago. So when we did the overall facility study and programming needs assessment in the city, when we did the citywide pavement assessment, the stormwater master planning update, all of those laid the groundwork for the facilities that we're seeing today. So the fire station replacement, the city building renovations, the ADA upgrades, and then the financial planning that has gone into practice over the past 4 years allowed us to give the extra $2 million to the equity and quality of life infrastructure projects in the neighborhoods. So all of this, what you're seeing, much of what you're seeing on this list here in terms of our facilities projects had their beginning 4 and 5 years ago. And that's what it takes to bring projects of this scope and scale to fruition in a city. And I don't think unless you've been involved in the planning or seen what goes on behind the scenes, people sometimes don't realize how much time it takes. Things don't just pop out of the ground when it comes to projects like this. So I truly appreciate the work and planning and effort that staff and our consultants have put into this, because it's really gotten us to a really good place right now. So any questions for Tim? I can't see everybody's hands. Mary Alice, and then Grace.
I don't actually have any questions. I just wanted to thank Tim and all the other people who've been working on these projects for this update. I don't recall, maybe it has happened, but I don't recall ever getting an update on all of the different projects that we've had in the past, so it's greatly appreciated.
Welcome.
Grace.
Thanks. Yeah, also want to say thank you for the presentation and the organized update all together here. And I was wondering about the Carl sanitary sewer. If I imagine that is there not any cost sharing on that? Is that kind of the city infrastructure? And you mentioned avoiding possible liability issues. Is that kind of like figuring out where that line of responsibility is? Or wondering if you could explain a little more about the responsibility and the cost associated with that.
Sure. As of now, everything is anticipated to be city-borne cost. The current setup is that we have sanitary sewer that runs below Carl. Typically for like private sewers and things of that nature, building sewers within their own confines are just private sewers and they're just serving themselves. But in this instance, we actually have other public wastewater flow that's traversing through this same line. So thus making it more of a public asset. We've talked with Carl. They have some setup in their basement that we're looking to learn how to function, but I think it's essentially set up that allows them a certain amount of wastewater detention at their own facility, provided we had an issue within our public sewer so that they could continue to operate in emergency conditions without sewer service. I think the long-term goal here would be trying to create a more clear delineation between the city and Carl at the end of the day. And some of this is going to have to look back on some of the history of this setup and what's going on here, and kind of looking at more of a long-term, I think from Carl's standpoint as well as ours, there's a benefit to creating this delineation and trying to resolve any potential issues before there are potential issues. I don't know if there's going to be a cost share from them at all at this point. I wouldn't necessarily foresee it right now, but I do think there's a shared benefit here. So that will be something we'll engage with them on as we get a little bit more information figured out. My intent is to kind of get the feasibility study done to see what are the exact constraints and conditions we're dealing with, what are our feasible alternatives, and depending on what comes out of that, probably discuss those alternatives with both Carl and potentially UCSD as well if they need to be a player in this.
Thank you.
Jan.
Yeah, I also wanted to just say thank you for, I know you were talking about wanting to make it more interactive, but I thought this was really clear and really helpful to kind of see where things are. And the CIP, there's so much in it. And just to see all of the work and all the progress that's happened is really impressive. And I really appreciate the update. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, you were so thorough. There are no questions.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time, and certainly feel free to reach out if something piques your interest later on. I think one more nugget I meant to add in here is this consists of about 35 of our projects in the FY22. And of these 35 projects, this is about $14 million worth of money that we're appropriating in all of this, just to kind of give it some scale for everybody. I appreciate everybody's time. Reach out to me if you need something.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to council input and communications. If any council members want to make comments, you'll have up to 3 minutes.
Yeah, I thought I would mention this one more time because I've received a number of communications from residents about concern about Urbana and regulation of beekeeping because of what the county was considering, which I understand the county has now eliminated. I just want to make it clear to the citizens of Urbana, there was never anything on this council's agenda for changing the way beekeeping is currently handled in the city of Urbana. That was completely based on the county trying to change their zoning and the possibility that the city would weigh in on the change of the county zoning because it's within 1.5 miles of the city limits. So we've never thought about that. We have no intent, as far as I know, to think about that. So beekeepers in Urbana do not need to worry about that at this point. Thanks.
Chris.
Thank you. In September of 2020, the city of Urbana recognized its own priorities to increase minority participation in city procurement, hiring, and contracting, and to work with the Human Relations Commission to develop a system to incentivize and advocate for equity and increased minority employment rates by unanimously passing an intergovernmental agreement with Champaign that would allow Urbana to access the Champaign Diversity Advancement Programs database in order to increase contracting with businesses owned by women, racial and ethnic minorities, and other economically disadvantaged businesses. So what is the status on the city's bid documents reflecting our hiring goals, our procurement policies, and a business registry published on the city's website? In addition, hopefully we can find a way to fund a compliance officer to help us maintain minority-owned and women-owned business participation. As we recover economically from the pandemic and as we battle gun violence and crime, equal opportunity for employment is going to be critical. The city of Urbana can do its part to set the example and lead the way to a better local economy. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you. Any other comments? Chandra?
I just wanted to point out to my fellow council members that Carol Mitten sent an email earlier today with the final draft of our scope of scope of work for a community safety review. I just wanted to make sure you put your eyes on it so that we can move that along as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Jaya.
Just to piggyback off of that, I wanted to thank Carol and the city staff who worked on that document. Very pleased with what I've seen of it so far, and know that that's been something that many of us have been pushing for since this term started. So just really appreciate the staff's efforts on that.
Any other comments by council members? Okay, we'll move on to reports of the standing committee. And I understand, I just needed a parliamentary opinion on this. If a council member wants to remove an item from the consent agenda, do they need a motion and a second, or can that request just be made and it be pulled off?
I think that that request can just be made since they've already discussed this stuff in the beginning, and she can pull it out for further discussion.
Okay, well, I'll call on then Councilmember Jaya Colasetti, who chaired the Committee of the Whole.
Sure. On behalf of the Committee of the Whole, we've got, I think, 16 items on our consent agenda, but it sounds like we are pulling one item out. Grace, what item did you want to pull out?
Yeah, I was hoping we could pull out item A to the regular agenda because I plan to abstain from that, so I could still vote on the other ones.
Okay. So we're pulling out resolution number 2022-02-018R, which is the resolution accepting a grant from the Champaign County Environmental Stewards. Okay.
All right, so starting with that item, on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I'd like to recommend resolution number 2022-02-018R, resolution accepting a grant from the Champaign County Environmental Stewards for approval on behalf of the Committee of the Whole.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Jaya, seconded by Chandra. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Abstain.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. And since we're actually put that on the regular agenda, let's just go to the other regular agenda item, which is ordinance number 2022-01-007. And then we'll go back to the consent agenda with your permission.
Right. On behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I recommend ordinance number 2022-01-007, an ordinance amending ordinance number 2018-12-082, Urbana City Code, Chapter 2, Administration, Article 4, Boards and Commissions, Division for Arts and Cultural Commissions and Arts and Culture Program, adding a new youth member to the Arts and Culture Commission for approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Jaya, seconded by Mary Alice. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu.
I think Chandra had a question.
Oh, okay.
Chandra? You're muted, Chandra.
This was one that Rachel was amending a bit. Was settled?
Yes.
She sent a follow-up now confirming.
Okay.
Or
just making sure that it was correct in the title now.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes.
All right, I have a procedural question. Do I need to read all of the items that are in the consent agenda or just All right, here we go. All right, on behalf of
Take a deep breath.
of the whole, I recommend the following items on the consent agenda for approval. Resolution number 2022-02-004R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of a Urbana Home Consortium subrecipient agreement, Courage Connection TBRA. Resolution number 2022-02-005R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium subrecipient agreement, Champaign County Regional Planning Commission, TBRA. Resolution number 2022-02-006R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium Community Housing Development Organization agreement, Habitat for Humanity, Choto Developer PY 2021. Resolution number 2022-02-007R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium Community Housing Development Organization agreement, Habitat for Humanity, Choto Operating PY 2021. Resolution number 2022-02-008R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium Community Housing Development Organization agreement, Habitat for Humanity, Choto Certification PY 2021. Resolution number 2022-02-0009R, a resolution approving amendment number 1 to a City of Urbana Community Housing Development Organization Program Agreement, Habitat for Humanity, Champaign County, Inc. Resolution number 2022-02-010R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of subrecipient agreement, Youth Services Agreement, Urbana Neighborhood Connections Community Studies Center. Resolution number 2022-02-011R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of a subrecipient agreement, Youth Services Agreement, Urbana Neighborhood Connections, Urbana Youth Development Program. Resolution number 2022-02-012R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of a subrecipient agreement, Youth Services Agreement, Steam Genius DBA Hip Hop Express. Resolution number 2022-02-013R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of a subrecipient agreement, Youth Services Agreement, HV Neighborhood Transformations Teen Summit Program. Resolution number 2022-02-014R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of a subrecipient agreement, Youth Services Agreement, Don Moyer's Boys and Girls Clubs Transportation for Youth, for Urbana Youth. Resolution number 2022-02-015R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of subrecipient agreement, Youth Services Agreement, Don Moyer Boys and Girls Club CU Together Support Program. Resolution number 2022-02-016R, resolution approving and authorizing the execution of a subrecipient agreement, Youth Services Agreement, Champaign County Regional Planning Commission Youth Assessment Center. Resolution number 2022-02-017R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of a subrecipient agreement, Youth Services Agreement, the Well Experience Family Care Program. Ordinance number 2022-02-08, an ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 3, Section 343, increasing number of Class P liquor license for Philo South Mart Inc., DBA BP Gas Station, 1821 South Philo Road, Urbana, Illinois. And that's all of that. For approval.
Could we have a second? That's a much easier job. So moved by Jaya, seconded by Chandra. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Okay. Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti.
Yes.
That motion passes. Thank you. We'll now move on to reports of special committees. I don't believe there are any. Reports of officers. No, okay. No, okay. Then we'll move on to new business. We have a couple of appointments tonight. The first is to renew the appointment of our interim director of community development services effective February 28th, 2022 through February 13th, 2024, or until filled, whichever is sooner. And we fully expect it to be much, much sooner than that, that particular date. But this is for Sheila Dodd. She currently serves as the interim director of community development services, and she's also the grant manager for the city of Urbana and provides staff support as part of that job to the Community Development Commission, and the bio was attached in the packet. We wanted to let you know that the request for proposals for a search firm to conduct the search for both the Community Development Services Director and the Police Chief, proposals are due February 25th. We will pick a firm to do that and then get those searches underway. So again, we expect that this Community Development Services position will be filled as soon as we possibly can, but we wanted to just give time for Sheila to do her job. So I'd entertain a motion for approval. Mary
I
Alice?
would be pleased to approve interim director for community development services for the term ending February 13, 2024, or until filled whenever sooner for Sheila Dodd.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is that James? Okay. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Mr. Evans.
Yes.
That motion passes. Congratulations, Sheila. The second appointment is for the Housing Authority of Champaign County Board of Commissioners. Just for background information, this is one of a couple of boards that is an external board that the city of Urbana makes appointments to. So the RPC is another board, for example. So the Champaign County Housing Authority Board has 7 members. City of Champaign, City of Urbana both make appointments. Then there's also one appointment from Champaign County and an appointment from the Resident Advisory Board. So we have one vacancy on the Housing Authority Board that will fill the unfinished term of Danielle Chenoweth. And this would be through January 31st, 2023. So I'm recommending for your approval Todd Salen, who's a 35-year resident of Champaign County. He works as a real estate managing broker for commercial and residential real estate. He works in both cities. He teaches both pre-licensed real estate at Parkland College and continuing education through the Champaign County Association of Realtors. He included a statement on his application that I wanted to read into the record. It's, quote, "I'm consistently mystified how a community as wonderful as CU can have such poverty and homelessness, in particular the struggles many families have in finding a permanent residence. As a realtor, I take great pride in helping families find solutions for their obstacles and then helping them find their first home. There's nothing more rewarding than helping others take their first step. Champaign County is certainly not alone in needing to find solutions for homelessness, but certainly we have the willpower, the funding, and the wherewithal to find solutions to these challenges. I often mention the 300 Unit 4 students, the 500 UIUC students, the 500 plus local families without addresses. We must find better solutions, and this board is a critical means to the end." Mr. Salen's community board service currently includes a role as executive secretary of the Rotary Club of Champaign, and he serves as a trustee at Faith United Methodist Church. Prior service included on the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity of Champaign County, volunteer work with the Daily Bread Soup Kitchen, the Salvation Army, and Empty Tomb. And I believe his experience, his professional experience as a realtor, and his personal contributions and service to the community give him the background and experience that will make him a very productive member of the Housing Authority Board. And again, this is to fill out basically the 1 year left in the current seat. When I was in a conversation with the director of the Housing Authority, one of the, I asked them what kinds of help she needed on the board, and she mentioned specifically people with backgrounds in real estate and the legal profession. So I think this meets the needs of the board. So I would entertain a motion. Jaya.
Can I just ask a clarification quickly? You mentioned a year and mentioned 2023, but on the agenda it says term end June 30th, 2025.
Yes, thank you. We need to change that to June 30th or January 31st, 2023. Thank you. Forgot to mention that. Kind of been came into office and there were no records. So anyway, thank you. So yes, it would be for the term ending January 31st, 2023. Is there a motion?
Yeah, go ahead, Chandra. I would move approval of Todd Salen to fulfill the unfinished term that will, for the Housing Authority, Champaign County, that will run through January 31st, 2023.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes. Okay, we'll move on to the final item, which is discussion, and that is related to the goal setting session, final council goal setting session, which is scheduled for February 22nd, 2022. And Carol, did you want to introduce this?
Yes, please. So I just want to be sure that we are all on the same page about what your expectations are about how we will spend that evening. My understanding is A, that it will be the final session. B, I was under the impression, I could be wrong, but we just want to be sure that we are facilitating in accordance with your desires, that the topic would be the strategic area number 1, which is the public safety area, as opposed to revisiting all of the all 4. And then I wanted to also ask you a couple of other things that maybe you could give some guidance on. Let me just share my screen real quick to show the spreadsheet, just in case you all don't have it at your fingertips. So this is strategic area number 1, the public safety and well-being, and we basically have 2 strategies within that area. One is more on the short-term side, to pursue methods to mitigate community violence. And there's 2 basic buckets there. One is there's 2, A and B are both about addressing root causes of violence. One is through community organizations and the other is internal, but they're both around root causes of violence. And then there's the C there is to identify and fund options and enhance the current police investigative and operational capacity to address community violence and solve serious crimes. So they're sort of like solve crimes and prevent crimes. Those are the short-term things. And then the second one is the enhance and expand public safety resources. And that's largely focused on the community safety review and the outcomes of it. And that's more of a longer term proposition. So I'm wanting some guidance from you, and we won't have Kevin James with us that night, but Will Kolchowski and I will do our best to help guide the conversation. But we want to know, are you interested in more detail on these areas, these action steps that you are already identified? Are you interested in developing more, given that these are already quite meaty? And then my final question, just before I'm just kind of trying to get it all out there for your reaction, to the extent that ARPA funds have been identified as the resources for the 2 action steps that involve root causes. How do you see those? How do you see that conversation, whatever we might talk about on the 22nd, as it relates to those areas, dovetailing with the ARPA public engagement feedback, and then those discussions? So just trying to sort out what your expectations are about that evening so we could help facilitate the conversation so you get the outcomes you're looking for.
Yeah.
I'm going to see how much of that I can remember. And I will say, unfortunately, I'm going to have to be late for that meeting because I have a conflict. So if I'm remembering correctly from previous conversations, we went in reverse order. So we ended up with very little time for priority area number 1. And I think kind of partially out of that haste, there were other areas that were initially part of that some folks wanted to go back to and make sure that we were considering the whole totality of, did it make sense to narrow it down to this degree? Because like you said, that's meaty just with those few items, but I think that anything that's done in haste, there's always that chance for missing something. So I think that's one piece. That's my understanding, and I think that makes sense, right? To be intentional, especially about such an important area. I think the other piece that we talked about a little bit was as we were going through each section, there were times where we said, well, yeah, all of those are important, but we don't know if we can really do all of those in this time frame, but we're going to come back after we've looked at them all. And having run out of time for one of the priority areas, there really wasn't that opportunity for reflection, right? To say, okay, we've identified these different areas. Now, with all of this, do we think it's realistic to do all of these things in 3 years? So I think for me, at least, I think there are both of those pieces of needing to make sure we're clear on priority area number 1, but then also reflect on that overall conversation. Once that has happened, to think about what is feasible in this time frame. And then in terms of ARPA, I think that's a great question, right? Of like, some of this is about that kind of intentional gathering feedback and those aspects. But I think we're also seeing with things like this, these are urgent, right? And so this might require us being creative if we have this great partnership with RPC, but there might be a need to utilize some of that funding that we already have to address some more urgent problems. So I think those are my quick responses to your very good questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jaya, for bringing back that kind of step back and holistic view of what we've put here, and prioritization and feasibility is part of that. And one of the dimensions I think we said we would utilize in that is timing and resources, looking at what we ended up with, and that some of these, we may believe these are all important, but we may be able to make some commentary about staging, and particularly where they seem to be bunched up on a particular resource, and so they can't possibly go forward at the same time, right? How do we fit those dimensions into the picture from a council perspective, which is admittedly a little bit removed and at 30,000 feet compared to what the staff might actually have to do to time things or prioritize them or put them in a work plan.
Grace.
Thank you. I want to say also, Carol, that I really appreciate having this conversation to kind of get on the same page, like you said, about the kind of expected outcome of it. I think that's really great, and I appreciate having this preliminary conversation going into that one. So thank you for that. I think I've been pretty vocal sending out some emails and things on my thoughts, but I'll reiterate that I do think it's important to touch base with the commissions. I talked to the one that I was on, and they actually had a lot of thoughts that they'd like to have as input on this. I know this is council and mayor, but I think it's great to include them whenever possible. So like their input on it, if possible, and then also how we could partner with utilizing the commissions in some of these goals. I think it makes sense to definitely finish the public safety one. I agree that there are some meaty ones, but also, you know, like Jaya said, we cut down quite a bit. This is the smallest number of strategies and number of items out of any of them. So I don't feel like we left it really finalized. So I would like to focus on finalizing that first priority. And then I also agree that I think it is good to take a step back, and we didn't have the chance to review everything in totality and say, is this really the priority? Do we have the resources? And then I think the timeline is really important. I don't feel very comfortable that we're setting ourselves up to success when we don't have kind of set target timelines, and when we plan to start working on things and when we plan to complete them. I understand that there's, needs to be room for flexibility. But I just don't see us setting ourselves up for success if it's like these things will take 12 months starting whenever we start them, which we're not willing to even speculate a commitment to when we would try and start these things. I think it would be really helpful to lay it out in a timeline on when we expect to start and complete things. And then I think that would also be a helpful exercise when we're looking at priority and timing. Like, for example, a lot of them falling on executive branch or community development. And are they okay with that? What does the staffing end say about the timing and the priorities and the resources available? So I think that's most of my thoughts for now. And again, I appreciate having this conversation to get on the same page for the next one.
So can I just get a general agreement that we may spend a little bit of time talking about overall execution and what that might look like, or check-ins or whatever, but the bulk of our time on the 22nd will be spent on strategic area number 1. Is that everybody's expectation? Because we'd like to we have invited, pending this discussion, more folks from the police department, so that depending on how we decide to have the conversation, even though we'll all be talking about the same thing, it's hard to talk as an overall group. And if we're using tables, then everybody would have, have someone with expertise from the police department, so that they're there to, kind of participate and bounce ideas off of. Because I think that the folks who had this as their small group found that to be useful. So we're trying to get additional people there. So I'll give it back to you to call on folks, Diane.
Okay, Chandra?
So I noticed that the action steps in the strategic area number 1 are very broad, whereas the other action steps are more, focused and narrowed. So for instance, funding community organizations, which ones, what does that mean? I think if we made it more specific, it would be easier to complete, as Grace said about the timeline. So I think going back to really iron out what community programs and what root causes are we trying to address. And I also think that making sure that the community engagement coordinator is present at the meeting if possible as well, because a lot of the outreach and the community organization he has a lot of knowledge around. So I definitely want to have him in the room. I understand in inviting a few of the police staff, but I also think that a lot of, say for example, strategy 1 is a lot of like community engagement type of stuff. And so I'm not sure if they'll be the ones executing the community engagement portion, but just keeping in mind that the outreach and the community engagement, who will be actually performing that and making sure they're in the room too.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. What I was thinking particularly, because we've had some internal discussions, is about sort of expanding so that everyone has a common understanding of what is the breadth of the root causes of violence, because it's not, that's quite, that in itself is quite broad. So we can do some prep work to break that down so that everybody has a common understanding coming in the door about what that really means.
And just
we'll try to get Lamont there also. Good suggestion.
And just to dovetail and remind the public that in the previous discussion with RPC, the council identified 5 major priority areas to consider ARPA funding on, and those all intersect right here with root causes of violence. So you'll be talking about housing, economic development, job opportunities, there's infrastructure, and there's safety and well-being. So it'll intersect. Mary Alice.
So I apologize for not being able to be at the last goal setting session. One of the things that struck me on the strategic area number 1, as several people have mentioned, is just kind of how light the number of action items are, but yet each one is very, very broad. The second thing that I've been thinking about is really focusing some of it on well-being. Right now, a lot of it's based on public safety. And I know that community organizations, and maybe it just requires some tweaking of some of the language, but I do want to look at it with the lens of well-being as well, not just public safety. And I guess my third thing that I would say, and maybe this is more to Grace, which is talking about timelines and everything. I think that there is a lot of unknowns right now, and I'd rather see timelines on the initial stages and then set up timelines for things that come after that. So for example, having completing a public safety review will inform different items, and we don't know how long those different items will take after we come to that conclusion. So I'd rather, if we're going to sit and talk about timelines, I'd rather talk about like the order of operations, what needs to come first, and that first item be that timeline, and then we can figure out the timelines after we complete those.
Okay, James.
Yeah, I do want to point out that we didn't remove anything from the strategic area number 1 or take it off the table. They were actually broader and had more things in them for the last round, and some of those things got shifted to be aligned with some of the other areas. There were things under the public safety and well-being that lined up with housing or lined up with infrastructure that got moved out. But I just didn't want anyone to get the impression who's watching this that we had things in public safety and well-being that we took off the table. They just got aligned with other areas. And in fact, it had, I think, the more items as we went in the last round of working through where things fit.
Okay, Jaya.
So I wanted to come back to Grace's point about the timeline. So initially, the duration column did have time frame, I think was what Kevin had on there. And I think that was intentional. I would agree with Grace that it provides some level of accountability, even if it's saying, you know what, we're still in this pandemic, we're behind schedule, we're not able to do it. I mean, I think about the presentation we got tonight about the CIP, right? Having that frank, open conversation of, yep, we're on track for these, we're doing okay, or no, we're really not, right? It provides that level of accountability that if you're just like, yeah, well, we're going to start it and then we'll see. It's not to say that those timelines can't be changed, but I think for this to have teeth, for it to have kind of that impetus to get things done, and I would argue that that's what Kevin said too. The reason you put those timeframes on there is so that you have those touch points, you have those opportunities to look back and say, did we accomplish what we said we would do? and that's why you make them actionable. So I would agree there's more fine tuning to do here to make some of these action steps more actionable. But I would argue that it is actually valuable and important to have specific timeframes, not just a sense for how long those programs would take or those pieces would take.
So if we can talk about this more on the 22nd, and we'll have different staff people there who may be able to offer commentary too. But I don't want people to lose track of the fact that the reason we prioritize the items, and then we did, I actually am the one who changed this. Sometimes it says duration, and then there was one group that actually put dates on things like ongoing or each September. That says time frame, and then under infrastructure they put actual dates, and so those say time frame. And the issue was I'm going to stop sharing because I just made everything go away. The things we prioritize them because we want staff to focus on the first priority first, and the other things won't necessarily be done simultaneously. They'll be done in sequence. Doesn't necessarily mean they won't start an item until the first one's done, but we wanted to communicate clear priorities. So then if you start having things cascade that have 12-month durations, then it looks like you wouldn't, if you actually put dates to that, then it looks like you're not actually starting it until the first one's done. And so it's a little hard to manage that way. So what I'd like to do is have some of the people that would be managing these things give you some feedback about how they would like to be held accountable for implementing these things. Because I would like to give a general. And remember, we're sitting at tables kind of spitballing the time frames. It wasn't, it wasn't real scientific, and it wasn't with a lot of consultation. But I'd like to let the people involved sort of offer some ideas about how they would like to manage this, if that's acceptable.
Yeah, ultimately, the staff is going to have to operationalize this. So council is being asked to set the goals, strategies, and action steps, and then we'll have to have staff operationalize it. Grace.
Sorry, lost my mute button. Thank you. I agree with having input from the staff and the people who are going to execute these things for the timeline. I think that is definitely important. I think that, as I said, it's useful to have that timeline for accountability and just checking in on progress, because it also seems like there's no real way for the council or public to really check in and ask for an update if it's something that's just like, it'll take 12 months whenever we start, instead of like, now we know we have to do this piece first, so we're not starting that until 6 months from now or whenever it is. I think that would be a really helpful planning tool. In the infrastructure group that I was in, we did set deadlines. And I think that also in exploring and looking at things, like, can I share real quick? It's okay. I did it. Okay. In something like this, we realized that we had set a lot of our completion things for, we just said like, okay, the end of 2022 sounds nice. So we set a lot of things for December. And I think when you can visually lay it out a little more, then we can look at it and realize like, oh, is that really the best thing? We set it because it sounded like a nice end of the year kind of goal, but is that actually the best thing to be working on? And if not, then let's reevaluate that. And I think it's kind of important to plan that ahead of time. And I think that as far as the prioritization, I think it does make sense. And I think we could also start on some earlier, like in our last one for infrastructure. I had C, this is just a hypothetical draft, but I had C starting earlier than the others, even though it's a lower priority. But I think that in this case, it does make sense because this is one that I've been kind of involved in with Scott Test. Like we have a UI/UC class helping in some of the research already, because this is when their semester's starting. And I think it is important to have the input from the people who are actually going to be working on it. And I think the prioritization makes sense. And I think that it might not necessarily fall in a linear order. Like you said, there might be some things starting, taking longer. And I think it would be really helpful to have more specifics laid out.
Well, actually, you point out a very good example, the infrastructure group, which I sat in on as well. We also had the director of public works and the deputy director for operations. So the two staff members who knew exactly what their situation was and had a very good idea of when this stuff could be done were actually helping set these timelines, which is what we mean by operationalizing it. We need the people who are going to do this work to be the ones who can help set some of these this timeline. So I think it can be done. We'll set the touch points. We'll get it done. But the infrastructure had more specific dates because the very people who were going to do it were sitting in that group. So that's an example of how we need to involve the staff in establishing these and setting up the touch points and the updates. Jaya.
So I think what I'm hearing, and I think all of us agree, right? We're not just to be like, staff, go do the things and when we say you should, because we don't have that context. But it sounds like for this meeting, having an understanding of, setting those priorities like we've talked about, and then maybe just making that plan for operationalizing it, right? So like maybe that's the piece that council can kind of put their teeth into, because if we're saying, these are our priorities, I think that saying we need to be held accountable to the priorities we're setting is an important piece of it too. So finding that balance of, yes, of course, staff are the ones who are actually going to be implementing these pieces, and they need to be involved in that process of determining what's a reasonable timeline. So I think there's kind of compromise there, right? Of like recognizing that a conversation about what operationalization should look like could be part of what happens in next week's meeting, but also recognizing that some of those specific targets might need to be determined once there's more opportunities for involvement with staff. But at least I will say for myself, I would still like to see specific dates whenever it is possible.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the top priority for the 22nd is to identify and finalize the goals and flesh out any action steps that you think need to be there. And then we can also talk about what kind of reporting and accountability that needs to be there. This is, and again, when we started these goals, it was for 1 to 2 years. So that's also what we need to keep in mind. Is this realistic for 1 to 2 years? Given everything else, this isn't the only thing we're doing. So is it realistic for the next 1 to 2 years? And then how are we going to get it done? Okay, I think we got.
I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Okay. And we'll be sending out more information about the meeting on the 22nd. Format will be very similar to the previous sessions. It will be in a different location, but all that will be posted. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our agenda. Happy Valentine's Day. You still have time to go buy some flowers if you need to. Otherwise, enjoy your evening. Thank you. Bye-bye. This meeting is adjourned.